1.4 billion people. What if they all started doing the same thing at the same time? Not protesting, not rioting, not rebelling, just stepping back, saving instead of spending, avoiding debt, delaying families, refusing risk. It doesn't look dramatic, but in a country where growth depends on constant expansion, on construction, on investment, on momentum, that quiet shift is lethal. Because when 1.4 billion people stop fueling the machine slows. And when the machine slows in a system built on targets, debt, and endless building, something breaks. This is the quiet strike spreading across China, and it could break the world's second largest economy from the inside out. Walk through any mid-tier Chinese city right now. Not Beijing, not Shanghai, the ones that were supposed to be the next economic miracles. Shopping malls that were packed just 5 years ago sit half-lit, their escalators carrying nobody. Wedding venues are booking fewer ceremonies year after year. Bank deposits keep climbing to record highs. And young professionals who were once told that hard work guarantees a better tomorrow, they're not buying it anymore. Literally, there's a word for it. Several, actually. Tangping, lying flat. It started as a single post on a Chinese internet forum back in 2021, written by a factory worker named Lu Haohuang, who quit his job and then biked over 1,000 miles from Sichuan to Tibet and decided that he was done chasing a future that didn't want him. His message was simple. Lying flat is justice. He lived on $60 a month. He ate 2 meals a day and spent his time reading philosophy. The post went viral. It became one of the top 10 internet memes of the year. And it didn't stop there. By 2023, a darker evolution had taken hold. Bailan, meaning let it rot. Not just stepping back from ambition, but actively embracing deterioration. Why fight a losing battle? And then by 2025, a new term surfaced that was bleaker still. Rat people. Young graduates who've abandoned conventional success entirely, working just enough to survive, spending as little as possible. Not dating, not buying homes, not participating in the economic machine at all. Peer-reviewed research now treats these phenomena as more than just internet slang. Scholars describe lying flat as a genuine reevaluation of normative success, a rational response to diminishing returns on effort in a system where 12 million graduates flood the job market every single year, chasing positions that increasingly don't exist at the level that they were promised. And the numbers behind the withdrawal are staggering. China's birth rate has cratered. Just 7.9 million births in 2025, the lowest since the founding of the People's Republic. The fertility rate has fallen to about 1.0, well below the 2.1 needed just to maintain the population. The total population shrank by 3.4 million in a single year. Young people aren't just lying flat at work, they're opting out of families entirely. Marriage registrations have plummeted. The number of women in peak childbearing age is projected to drop from 105 million today to just 58 million by 2050. Beijing's attempted fixes border on parity. In January of 2026, a 13% value-added tax on condoms and birth control took effect, ending a 3-decade exemption. A $12.7 billion childcare subsidy offered families a lump sum of about $500 per child under 3. Neither addresses the actual reason, though, that young people aren't having children. They can't afford homes, they can't find decent jobs, and they don't see a future worth bringing kids into. And here's the part that should terrify Beijing. In September of 2025, China's Cyberspace Administration launched a 2-month campaign to scrub excessively exaggerated negative and pessimistic sentiments from the internet. Bloggers documenting their lying flat lifestyles had their accounts banned and their videos mass deleted. The government ordered platforms to instead promote adversity-defying narratives, heartwarming stories of young people that stayed cheerful in a dead-end job. They didn't just disapprove of the mood, they tried to censor it. They literally tried to ban despair. But you can delete the post, you can shut down an account, you can't make 1.4 billion people believe in a future that they no longer trust. And that wouldn't matter in most countries, but China isn't most countries. See, most major economies run on their own people buying things. In the US, household consumption makes up about 68% of GDP. In Europe, 52%. The global average is around 56%. But in China, roughly 40%. That number alone tells you everything about how this economy actually works. Chinese households aren't the engine of growth. They're almost a bystander to it. The real engine is investment. Massive, relentless, state-directed investment. Gross capital formation in China still runs at about 41% of GDP, a level that would be extraordinary in virtually any other country on Earth. Middle-income nations during their fastest growth periods typically peak around 30 to 35%. South Korea, at its most explosive, never crossed 40%. Vietnam and India haven't come close. And on the other side of that ledger, national saving in China exceeds 43% of GDP. An economy that hoards instead of spends. For decades, that formula delivered results that stunned the entire world. China built over 190,000 kilometers of expressways and a national road network that stretched 5.5 million kilometers. High-speed rail surpassed 50,000 kilometers, more than every other nation on Earth combined. Take every bridge currently standing in the U.S., China, well, they built the equivalent in 20 years. The entire U.S. housing stock, plus another 50 million units stacked on top. Rail networks that would stretch across the biggest American freight systems laid end to end. That's the kind of transformation that makes you understand why, for a generation, people spoke about China the way that they spoke about America, as something inevitable. It is, by any honest measure, the most staggering infrastructure build-out in human history. Desperately needed and jaw-droppingly impressive. And for a long time, it made sense. A country modernizing from deep poverty genuinely needed those roads, rails, ports, and housing blocks. They connected markets, they moved goods, they sheltered hundreds of millions of people flooding into cities looking for a better life. But here's the thing about building as an economic strategy. It only works as long as there's something productive left to build. And there are only so many people to drive on those roads, only so many families to fill those apartments. That brings us to the part of the story that changes everything. China didn't just build what it needed. It kept building long after the need had passed. And the reason has less to do with economics than it does with political survival. In China's governance system, local officials have historically been evaluated and promoted based on hitting growth targets. Scholarly research has documented this extensively. A tournament-style promotion system where visible, countable projects carry enormous political advantage. When Beijing announces a GDP target of around 5%, as it did in 2024, someone at the provincial level had to deliver that number. And the fastest, most controllable way to generate GDP is construction. You pour concrete, you lay asphalt, raise towers. Every yuan spent on materials, labor, and logistics counts as economic activity. Whether or not a single person ever lives in the building, or drives on the road, or sets foot in the stadium. Build a bridge, tear it down, build it again. GDP, it goes up every single time. And the result? Ghost cities. Not a metaphor. Actual cities verified by satellite imagery. Remote sensing studies have confirmed vacancy and underutilization on a massive scale across China's provinces. Academically grounded estimates from China's own household finance survey point to roughly 50 million vacant urban housing units by 2014, and then climbing towards 65 million by 2018. Research published in Nature Cities has investigated this as a serious indicator of structural mismatch between supply and demand. And that was before the real estate crisis hit full force. But you haven't heard the most dangerous part yet. Housing in China, it isn't just shelter. It's the single largest store of household wealth. Over 70% of it, according to Peking University research. In the US, that figure is about 35%. American families diversify across stocks, bonds, and retirement accounts. Chinese families pour everything into property. So when values rise, they feel rich and they spend freely. When values fall, the entire psychology inverts. Families freeze, consumption drops, savings spike. The wealth effect that drives American consumer confidence works in devastating reverse. And that reversal is well underway already. Major developers have collapsed under mountains of debt. Local governments that funded themselves by selling land to those developers watched their primary revenue source evaporate almost overnight. Reports out of Henan province describe civil servant salaries cut by 50%. In Guangdong, China's richest province, government workers have taken pay cuts up to 30%. Some cities can't maintain basic services, can't keep the streetlights on. The local government financing vehicles, off-balance sheet entities that bankrolled much of the infrastructure boom, now carry debt burdens that the Reserve Bank of Australia and the IMF have both flagged as serious systemic risks. Some estimates put total LGFV debt above $9 trillion, larger than the economies of Japan and Germany combined. When property weakens, this entire ecosystem strains at once. Land revenue falls, developer balance sheets crack. LGFVs become harder to service, and local governments face an impossible choice between austerity, refinancing, or begging Beijing for a bailout that may not come. It's a feedback loop with no obvious exit. Property falls, revenue collapses, governments cut back, confidence drops further. people save even more, and the very behavior that Beijing desperately needs to change, the hoarding, the caution, the withdrawal, it only deepens. Because once property stops rising, the entire psychology changes. And what came next? It wasn't panic. It was something worse. Hey, if you're watching this unfold in real time, hit subscribe. We break down the forces that don't make headlines, but do change history. And what follow confirm the worst fears of anyone paying close attention to the math. The International Monetary Fund has been warned, with increasing bluntness, that China's investment-led growth strategy is hitting rapidly diminishing returns. Heavy reliance on construction and infrastructure, financed by those record-high domestic savings, well, it's now associated with falling returns to capital and rising vulnerabilities across the financial system. The fund's projections show potential growth slowing materially over the coming decades without major structural reform. Not a dramatic crash, but a grinding decade-long deceleration that will slowly drain the oxygen from China's ambitions. This isn't speculation, it's arithmetic. If household consumption stays locked at about 40% of GDP, growth has to come from somewhere else. Investment? Well, returns are falling and the debt pile is growing. Exports? The world is pushing back harder than ever. The WTO has documented sharp rises in trade restrictive measures globally. Countries from India to Germany to the United States are all raising barriers, not out of spite, but of self-preservation. Germany's auto giants employ nearly 2% of the country's entire workforce. No government is going to watch that disappear to subsidize Chinese competition without a fight. India slaps sky-high tariffs on Chinese smartphones, solar panels, even toys. The walls that China has to climb to get goods into the world's biggest markets are getting higher by the month. And here's where this gets politically brutal. The reforms that would actually fix this, strengthening social safety nets, redistributing income toward households, loosening the hukou restrictions that deny hundreds of millions of migrant workers access to urban healthcare and education, well, every one of those requires a state to give up control, to redirect resources away from investment channels and state-owned enterprises and toward ordinary people. The IMF has said as much directly. Reducing household savings requires increased social spending and easing hukou-related exclusions, and this is the opposite of how Xi Jinping governs. So the trap stays shut. Reform means losing grip. Refusal means stagnation. And the Japan parallel, not as prophecy but as a structural warning, grows more uncomfortable every year. An investment-heavy model hitting diminishing returns. A property sector whose correction ripples through finance and government alike. A demographic structure that pushes households relentlessly toward caution. Japan's post-bubble decade shows exactly how an advanced economy can remain wealthy and stable while growing simply, and then it stops. Wealthy but frozen. For 30 years and counting, Japan didn't collapse. It didn't implode. It just lost its forward velocity and never got it back. The country that was supposed to overtake America became a cautionary tale about what happens when assets boom, demographics decline, and structural rigidity collide. China's situation, it isn't identical, but the family resemblance is deeply uncomfortable. And the most dangerous part of what's unfolding in China is that none of this is coordinated. Nobody organized a boycott. Nobody called a general strike. What's spreading is something far harder to confront. Millions of individual decisions, all pointing in the same direction. And every one of them makes perfect rational sense. Youth unemployment peaked at 21.3% in mid-2023. So alarming that the government temporarily stopped publishing the data altogether. It was still running at about 19% as recently as August 2025. Over 12 million graduates flooded the job market in 2025, and roughly 70% of unemployed 20-somethings hold university degrees. The term involution, competition spiraling inward, more effort for diminishing reward, has become the defining experience of a generation told to study harder, work longer, and expect less. And the pressure doesn't end at the job market. China's one-child policy, enforced for 36 years, created what researchers call the 4-2-1 family structure. One child potentially responsible for 2 aging parents and 4 grandparents. Healthcare costs fall heavily on families. Out-of-pocket spending accounts for roughly 32% of total health expenditure in China, far above what households face in wealthy nations. In the US, that figure is around 11%. A single catastrophic illness in China can drain everything a family has saved in months. Disposable income per capita was about $5,200 in 2025. An average hospital stay already costs around $1,400 in 2024. You do the math. So people save not because they want to, but because survival demands it. And even when they manage to accumulate some wealth, the options for growing it are brutally limited. Chinese stock indexes trade at roughly the same level that they did 20 years ago. The most profitable companies in the country, energy giants, major banks, infrastructure firms, are state-owned enterprises whose returns flow to the government, not to regular citizens' portfolios. Think about what that means. If the US government owned JP Morgan, ExxonMobil, Lockheed Martin, and every major bank and energy company, the incredible returns that those corporations generated over the last 2 decades, they never would have been able to reach ordinary Americans' retirement accounts. That's effectively how China works. The state captures the upside, and the regular people, they get nothing. The mechanism that transformed American household wealth, tax-advantaged retirement accounts channeling monthly savings into the biggest companies in the world, it simply doesn't exist in China. Every month, the average American automatically buys about $500 worth of stocks through a 401k. That cycle creates wealth, it drives spending, fuels company growth, and it starts again. Stock ownership tripled in the US over 2 decades because of those programs. Nothing remotely comparable has been built for Chinese families. No real safety net, no investment upside, no property wealth to fall back on anymore. The rational choice is obvious. You save everything, you spend nothing, and lie flat. And you can censor the words, but you can't censor the arithmetic, because the walls are closing in from every direction now. China can't invest its way into growth forever. The returns are diminishing. The debt is compounding, and there are only so many bridges to nowhere before the ledger catches up. It can't export its way out either. The post-Cold War era of open global markets is ending. The IMF has warned that policy-driven geoeconomic fragmentation risks reversing decades of integration gains. Now, countries that once welcomed Chinese goods with open ports are now building walls, tariffs, quotas, industrial policies, all designed to protect their own workers and their own factories. The numbers tell the story. China's trade surplus has ballooned past $850 billion, roughly 4.8% of GDP. That's not a sign of strength. It's a sign that China is producing far more than its own people will buy, and dumping the rest on a world that's increasingly refusing to absorb it. Every container that leaves Shanghai loaded with goods that Chinese consumers won't purchase is a reminder that the domestic engine is broken. And it certainly can't command its people to spend. Not when every incentive in the system, weak social protections, crushing demographic obligations, collapsed property values, non-existent investment returns, pushes in exactly the opposite direction. This is what a growth trap looks like. Not a single crisis with a clear trigger, not a dramatic crash that dominates global headlines overnight, but a slow compounding squeeze where every exit narrows at the same time. Diminishing returns don't announce themselves as a catastrophe. They arrive as a quiet loss of momentum, quarter by quarter, year by year, until the gap between ambition and reality becomes impossible to ignore. The model that once impressed the world, that built more infrastructure in 2 decades than most civilians build in a century, is now boxed in by its own design. So here's the question that should keep Beijing up at night. This isn't a revolution. There are no leaders to arrest, no movement to infiltrate, no slogans to ban, although they've certainly tried. There's no army to deploy, no border to close, no foreign adversary to blame. The threat is coming from inside, from the very population the system was supposed to serve. It's 1.4 billion people, each making the same rational choice: save instead of spend, wait instead of build, retreat instead of risk. And every single one of those choices, multiplied across the largest population on Earth, compounds into a force that no policy announcement, no growth target, and no censorship campaign can reverse. Superpowers don't always fall in fire. Sometimes they fade in caution. You can control speech, you can control the media, you can jail dissidents and censor despair, but you cannot control what 1.4 billion people choose to do with their own money. And when they choose safety, quietly, individually, without anyone giving the order, the system slows whether its leadership wants it to or not. This isn't a rebellion, it's a quiet strike, and it may be the one thing that finally breaks China's rise. So what do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for China's growth miracle? Or will Beijing find a way out of the trap that it built for itself? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to Fall of Nations for more on the forces reshaping the global order.